For quite some time, Disney had Hollywood in a chokehold with their jaw-dropping, crowd-pleasing animated movies. They seemed to run the show, until one man decided that it was time to really compete with Disney. Of course, we're talking about DreamWorks. For years, this studio managed to compete with Disney for the title of top-earning animated movie creator, but is it possible that they've fallen off? It's hard to answer that question with a simple yes or no, as many things, including their track record, current status, and so much more, play significant roles. To understand the current state of DreamWorks, we have to look at where it all got started. Let's roll back to the 80s and enter the Disney offices. At the time, Michael Eisner was the CEO of the Walt Disney Company, and Frank Wells was the president. The 80s were a bit of a rough time for the company, so Eisner looked for new talent. He brought in Jeffrey Katzenberg, a guy he'd worked with over at Paramount Pictures. Katzenberg got his start at Paramount as an assistant to producer David V. Picker. He later got a gig as Barry Diller's assistant, Barry Diller being the chairman of Paramount in 1974. After a while, Katzenberg was tasked with reviving the Star Trek franchise. He was behind the creation of Star Trek the Motion Picture. Following that success, he kept working his way up the corporate ladder while working under Eisner. This led to him overseeing the production of many movies like buddy cop classic 48 Hours and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Eisner believed that Katzenberg would be an important addition to the team, and he was. It's said that early on in his role at the studio, Eisner pointed Katzenberg to the animation studio and stated that it was his problem now. To understand the state of the studio, he wanted to watch their most recent movie. It was Disney's 25th animated motion picture, The Black Cauldron. The Black Cauldron was an extremely ambitious movie. It was a 70mm animated movie, the first since Sleeping Beauty. At the time, it was the most expensive animated feature ever made. To complicate things further, it was much darker than everything else Disney had been producing, earning it a PG rating, the first in Disney's animated history. When Katzenberg watched it, he thought that it was in rough shape. This led to a lot of arguments with the movie's producer, Joe Hale. Katzenberg cut several minutes out of the movie, changed the climax, and replaced songs that he found to be behind the times. This pushed the release date up to 1985. When it was finally finished, The Black Cauldron ended up as a box office bomb. After barely grossing even half of its budget, Hale was removed almost instantly, and the animation studio was relocated to a, well, let's say crappy building. This didn't stop Katzenberg though. He was ready to learn and put in the work, even though the animators believed that he didn't know what he was doing, and even said it right to his face. As the lead, Katzenberg made his goal clear. I'm not interested in the Academy Awards, I'm interested in the Bank of America Awards. With Peter Schneider as the vice president, Katzenberg decided to lock in. While 1986's The Great Mouse Detective, the first movie produced under his direct supervision, did not break records, it certainly marked a clear step up from the studio's previous statistics. However, in 1988, his next project, Oliver & Company, took off. While the movie had technical issues thanks to a considerably lower budget, it made up for them with star power, cameos, and edgier humor, which appealed to fans. This will become a bit of a running theme in the video, especially as we look at his later work. Oliver & Company was not a blockbuster, but it did help shape a better, cooler image for Disney, which was arguably the most important thing at the time. Katzenberg also capitalized on the newfound goodwill by announcing that the studio would be releasing new animated movies annually. This was not a popular decision internally. One of the animators, Glenn Keane, stated that it felt like the animation department was led by a maniac who simply kept his foot on the accelerator in a crowded city. One of Katzenberg's most infamous rituals was running the Gong Show pitch meetings, named after the popular game show. Here, animators would have to pitch 3 movie ideas, as producers were looking for something new and modern. This is actually how Oliver & Company got greenlit. In one of these meetings, The Little Mermaid was pitched and initially rejected for being too similar to the recently released Splash, but it ended up becoming a hugely ambitious movie, Disney's first fairy tale in over 30 years. The Little Mermaid was obviously a smash hit, starting the studio down a streak. However, the streak didn't last, as The Rescuers Down Under performed so poorly that Katzenberg had its advertising pulled. Still, it is a historically significant movie, as it was made on a new revolutionary system that replaced ink and paint. After this, Katzenberg decided to lock in once again and delivered with massive movies like Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin, both winning Oscars. Beauty and the Beast even became the first animated movie to be nominated for Best Picture. With this, Katzenberg had both won the Oscars and the Bank of America. While everything seemed good from the outside, inside tensions were rising. Katzenberg was known for being quite critical of things, and sometimes his instincts were plain wrong. For example, he wanted to cut part of your world from The Little Mermaid. Luckily, it was kept in thanks to the director's efforts. It's such an important part of the movie. I mean, can you imagine The Little Mermaid without part of your world? Furthermore, in 1991, Katzenberg sent a memo that would damage his reputation at Disney. After the studio's expensive venture with Dick Tracy turned out to be a big disappointment, he released a memo titled "Some Thoughts on Our Business." While this was supposed to be an internal memo, it ended up being sent around and becoming public, where it was ridiculed to no end. Eisner was obviously quite pissed at Katzenberg, especially because the memo plagiarized an identical message that Eisner had sent internally while he was at Paramount. It came off as Katzenberg trying to capitalize on the situation and grow his name internally, which he was already infamous for. In a 1991 article for Entertainment Weekly, Ryan Murphy and Alec Baldwin talked about Katzenberg's obsession with being credited for things and called him the eighth dwarf. Greedy. This was clear to other members of the company as well. Katzenberg was a massive self-promoter and would never let a credit pass him by. This was addressed to Eisner as well, who was fine with it until Katzenberg promoted only himself in connection with an animated movie. A few important people at Disney were not a fan of this move. However, people couldn't really tell him much, as when he headed up massive creative overhauls, they were almost always successful. However, folks who weren't fans of Katzenberg could always play their own cards as they saw fit. For example, Eisner and Roy Disney, Walt Disney's nephew and an important member of the board of directors, announced that they were building a state-of-the-art facility in Burbank for their animators during the cast and crew screening of Beauty and the Beast. Katzenberg did not even get a whiff of such plans. There were a lot of complaints about his one-movie-a-year plan too, and yet Katzenberg continued to push for working with studios other than Disney. Through this, he got major deals like working on Pixar's Toy Story. He also delivered the massive hit The Lion King, although he initially believed that Pocahontas would perform better. Confident in his abilities, he asked Eisner to make him president. However, this would mean that Frank Wells would have to step down and become vice president. This was obviously a complicated matter, so Eisner rejected him. However, he promised that if Wells ever did step down, Katzenberg would be given the position. Tragically, in 1994, Frank Wells died in a helicopter accident, which affected the company deeply. This was especially true for upper management, as Wells was the mediator for Eisner, Katzenberg, and Roy Disney. He was the glue holding these three together. With him gone, Katzenberg obviously expected to become president. However, before Eisner could make it happen, Roy jumped in. He stated that if Eisner made Katzenberg president, then he would initiate a proxy vote. This would be awful for the company, especially in such a delicate situation, and hence, Eisner stepped up and became president himself. Katzenberg saw this as a huge betrayal, as his friend and colleague for decades stole his rightful place after promising him it. While Roy felt that Katzenberg was too ambitious, Katzenberg was also right in making sure that he was known as the person who made hits possible. Sure, he overdid it at times, but nobody's perfect, and in a world where anyone could be replaced, it was a good call. With this betrayal, Katzenberg was left with only his name and his brand. He quietly worked in the company until his contract expired, leaving Disney in 1994 after a decade working with the company. Fueled with rage, Katzenberg wanted to open his own studio to prove just how important he was to Disney's success. To do so, he pulled one of the biggest moves in Hollywood history by announcing DreamWorks SKG, working alongside legendary director Steven Spielberg and successful label mogul David Geffen. This was something like the formation of a superband, where different members of famous groups come together to form something new. Katzenberg, an important figure in animation, who validated the industry with his Best Picture-nominated movie. Spielberg, who delivered some of the most critically and commercially successful movies of all time, like Jaws, Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park, and more. David Geffen was the co-founder of Asylum Records, known for major artists like the Eagles, Bob Dylan, and Linda Ronstadt, and later signed artists like Metallica, Jason Derulo, and Ed Sheeran. With the three coming together, DreamWorks SKG aimed to create a haven for those frustrated working in the creative field. Those who were tired of out-of-touch executives meddling in their art, misunderstanding what they were trying to express, and forcing them to overwork. After all, one of the biggest aims of the three founders was to be back home by dinner time. Combining these factors with a publicly anti-Disney approach, DreamWorks instantly became the biggest studio born that decade. These three men hoped to reach their personal goals of freedom, revenge, and, of course, higher success. They contributed $33 million each and got the rest of their capital through investors. $500 million of the investment was from Paul Allen, co-founder of Microsoft. DreamWorks started off boldly, spreading its wings the instant it was born. They opened a total of 8 subsidiaries, which included DreamWorks Animations, Interactive, Records, Television, and more. However, boldness did not immediately equate to strength. Their first release was a TV sitcom called The Champs, which premiered on January 9, 1996, and only received 1 season of 12 episodes. DreamWorks Records' first release was George Michael's Older, which was released on May 14, 1996. It peaked at number 6 on the US charts, which actually isn't so bad. They then released their first live-action movie on September 26, 1997, called The Peacemaker. The movie is a simple action movie, which grossed $110 million on a $50 million budget. Definitely not a flop. Spielberg managed to generate the first big dose of goodwill for the company with his 1997 movie Amistad, which was produced by HBO but distributed by DreamWorks. If you're wondering why DreamWorks did not produce the movie as well, it's because Spielberg was not contractually obligated to make all of his movies with DreamWorks. However, this was DreamWorks' only really notable work during the mid-90s. Still, Disney was going through a similarly rough time. Eisner managed to add fuel to the fire by hiring Michael Ovitz as the president. This guy was the co-founder of the Creative Artist Agency and was Spielberg's personal agent right up until the formation of DreamWorks. Hell, he even helped clear out some deals while in talks with Disney to take the position that Katzenberg was denied. I imagine it was to the DreamWorks founder's great satisfaction that Ovitz's tenure as president only lasted 16 months and was considered a total disaster. Katzenberg was still pissed off, of course, and the rivalry between the two companies became official when Katzenberg sued Disney for $250 million in 1999. Fascinatingly, it was Geffen who actually hated Ovitz the most out of everybody. Nicole Laporte's book, The Men Who Would Be King, states that Geffen said the following about Ovitz: "I am going to kill that motherfucker. It may take me years, but I'm going to destroy him. Watch me." That is a lot of heat. And he was right. It would take them years to put a big dent in their competitors' profits, as they lacked a strong distribution network. Because they did not have a major deal with any specific company, DreamWorks had to negotiate and work with studios that were their direct competitors. The effects of this can be seen in plenty of their movies. They also had to make other adjustments, like moving into the office of Amblin Entertainment, Spielberg's passion project, until they could find their own working space. These decisions foreshadowed the studio's messy and haphazard working structure, as the founders were not under strict obligation and juggled multiple projects, combining things as they pleased to create space for whatever took priority at the time. In the late 90s and early 2000s, the two companies went to war. It was like WWF versus WCW out here. DreamWorks released Ants on October 2nd, 1998, and Disney followed up with A Bug's Life the next month. Which one was in production first? You can look into that yourself. Then there was the release of DreamWorks' Prince of Egypt in December of 1998, followed by The Road to El Dorado in March of 2000. DreamWorks then put out Chicken Run in June of 2000, right after Disney dropped Dinosaur on May 19th. Of course, the DreamWorks cash cow Shrek entered the scene in 2001, while Disney rolled out Atlantis: The Lost Empire that same year. Then, in 2002, Spirit's Stallion of the Cimarron hit the scene, followed closely by Lilo and Stitch. These battles were never one-sided, as both DreamWorks and Disney claimed a few victories, and even though the box office battles were tense, this was the best time for DreamWorks to shine, as Disney was entering its post-Renaissance era, where output was inconsistent. Meanwhile, DreamWorks was facing tough competition from Miramax in the live-action sphere. Miramax was already an established and dominant figure, as they focused on making award-winning movies with their nearly unbeaten understanding of formulas, and by grabbing the best international films for US release. In 1999, Miramax won Best Picture with Shakespeare in Love, beating DreamWorks' first contender for the award, Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan. While this was a heavy blow, DreamWorks bounced back by winning 3 years in a row with American Beauty, Gladiator, and A Beautiful Mind. After defeating Miramax, the studio had finally established itself and delivered on what they'd originally promised. However, many other divisions were performing horribly, causing many to shut down and create a ton of debt, much to the anger of investors. After a few unsuccessful movies and multiple studios closing down, the company was in massive debt. $400 million to be exact. That's nearly as much as Paul Allen's initial investment, which gave him an 18% stake in the company during its launch. Now, before we delve into the company's 2000s era, let's take a look at their subsidiaries and what happened to them. On March 22, 1995, DreamWorks and Microsoft announced their joint venture called DreamWorks Interactive, a video game studio. Both companies pitched in about $30 million, employing 75 people. During this time, DreamWorks also bought Pacific Data Images, who mainly specialized in CG animation outsourcing. This is important as on June 1st, 1995, DreamWorks and Silicon Graphics formed a $50 million agreement to create a new animation system that would be focused on making movies, but also included DreamWorks Interactive. DreamWorks Interactive officiated Electronic Arts as their distributor in 1997. By that year, the studio had not seen any true success, with their biggest game being Goosebumps: Escape from Horrorland, which sold 130,000 units. They also started the production of a new first-person shooter franchise in 1996, but we'll come back to that soon. For now, we have to take a moment to talk about what is considered to be one of the worst games of all time. In 1998, the company released Trespasser, a game based on the Jurassic Park franchise. The game's ambitious technical controls did not sit well with gamers, and the game's overall quality was considered so poor that it only sold 50,000 units, making it a massive flop. Thankfully, DreamWorks Interactive bounced back with a game that had been in development for 3 years, 1996's Medal of Honor. Published by Electronic Arts, this game holds huge significance for the genre. The game featured a historical plot and saw the player complete various missions to fight off German forces. It inspired Call of Duty, which is now one of the most popular gaming franchises of all time, along with Battlefield and many more. While the company had delivered a major success, its other releases had not been so good, and Spielberg was losing interest in running a gaming company. Hence, it was sold to EA in 2000 for an estimated $10 million, and renamed EA Los Angeles. The company's run after this was turbulent, with their only true successes being Medal of Honor games. The studio was renamed to Danger Close Games in 2010 and eventually closed in 2012. Another subsidiary was DreamWorks Records, David Geffen's field of expertise. Launched in 1996, this subsidiary was supposed to stand tall as one of their main moneymakers. Rufus Wainwright was the first artist that the label signed. DreamWorks Records did have decent success with bands like Papa Roach and Jimmy Eat World, but things were not looking good for very long. By 2003, it was announced that Universal Music Group was acquiring the company for approximately $100 million, as the label was unable to beat its falling sales and the newfound trouble caused by piracy. The label was folded into Geffen Records and then ceased to exist. However, DreamWorks Nashville, a country music label launched in 1997, was still doing well on its own. However, things went south for them in 2005, as their biggest artist, Toby Keith, parted ways with the label to start his own. This was a death sentence for DreamWorks Nashville. The first subsidiary to provide any content from the DreamWorks SKG brand was DreamWorks Television, formed in 1994. The company entered a 7-year television production joint venture worth $200 million with Capital Cities ABC, and was set to produce series for the company with no first look for ABC Network. While this sounds like a bad idea for ABC, as they essentially do not have a valuable say in the series produced, the deal favored them financially. I previously mentioned the company's first series, Champs, which was canceled after just 12 episodes. DreamWorks managed to find success with Spin City, which ran for 6 seasons until 2002. Meanwhile, the Walt Disney Company bought Capital Cities ABC in 1996, forcing the rivals to work together. This did not turn out so well, as DreamWorks Television and NBC had a falling out in 1997. While it was sorted out, their agreement ended in 2002. The two companies re-signed their agreements, but with a few new conditions. NBC had a first look clause, financing for series pickups by the network while taking a financial stake in the show. DreamWorks Television could finance shows sold to other outlets, and NBC paid an annual fee to it. In the 2000s, the studio found some success here and there, but nothing groundbreaking. Eventually, in 2013, it was folded into Amblin Television, much like DreamWorks Records. Pacific Data Images, aka PDI, was a pioneering animation company that focused on CGI and had worked with DreamWorks on their movies since Ants. In 2001, DreamWorks bought them and merged with the company in 2004 as they went public. They also had a joint venture with Sega and Universal called GameWorks. This was a chain of arcades that always seemed to be less cool than the competition. While they were spread across the whole country and had a dozen international locations, GameWorks never took off the way the companies imagined. With Spielberg's interest dying, the company divested from the project, just like with their video game studio. GameWorks eventually filed for bankruptcy, was bought by several companies, and eventually closed down during the pandemic. There's still one location in Seattle, though, if you're ever interested in visiting that piece of history. It became apparent that their business plan of capturing a market share in every niche was not working by 2004. The company was selling off its limbs, and DreamWorks Pictures alone was in $400 million of debt. The founders decided to sell DreamWorks Pictures and initially approached General Electric. However, GE declined to buy DreamWorks because they were not profitable enough. It didn't take long for them to find a buyer though, as in December of 2005, Viacom, who owned Paramount Pictures at the time, agreed to buy the live-action studio for $1.6 billion while keeping the original names. This $1.6 billion value also included their $400 million in debt, giving the founders a sigh of relief. However, there were many challenges left for DreamWorks to face. Now, DreamWorks had become part of Paramount, and the parent company's vision was to primarily use them as an internal studio for their own projects. During the acquisition, it stated that Katzenberg said they were going to fix them from the inside. The founders of DreamWorks were only working under another company simply because they had to, as Spielberg even demanded complete autonomy from Paramount. It's clear the two companies had a tough time working together. Tensions were highest during the making of Dreamgirls, an adaptation of the Broadway musical. Things got worse as Geffen owned the musical. He was extremely hands-on during the making of the movie, and there were multiple arguments over credits with Paramount. Still, DreamWorks did some of their best live-action work under Paramount. They worked on movies like Transformers, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, Blades of Glory, and more. I believe Transformers is one of the best in the series, and a good portion of the credit for the movie being so good goes to Spielberg. Initially, Michael Bay rejected the idea of Transformers as he thought it was stupid and childish. However, he really wanted to work with Spielberg, who was a massive fan of the comics. This led to him jumping in and eventually becoming so invested that he took a 30% pay cut to keep production costs low. Spielberg also encouraged Bay to reduce the use of CGI in the movie, resulting in it becoming a marvel to watch even 2 decades later. The addition of What I've Done by Linkin Park is just the cherry on top. Well, enough Transformers for now, but do let us know if you guys want us to rank all the Transformers movies in the comments below. Anyway, the founders and other upper management were dying to get out from under Paramount, and in 2008, when their deal with Viacom and Paramount came to an end, they left to start anew with a smaller studio. First, they approached the Blackstone Group, Hughes Global, TPG Capital, and many more, but were rejected. In the end, they launched a joint venture with Reliance Big Entertainment. This company was a part of the Reliance Group, a massive group from India. The company was split into two by brothers Anil and Mukesh Ambani in 2005, with Anil's company becoming interested in DreamWorks. While his brother Mukesh is the richest Asian and the 11th richest person in the world right now, Anil is barely a billionaire anymore. While it sounds like things are on a downward trend for DreamWorks now, the ups and downs still need to be faced. First, DreamWorks got to keep its name and branding, but Paramount now owned their entire library. Every single cent made from any of DreamWorks' previous works went into Paramount's pockets. What made this worse was the fate of their other subsidiary, DreamWorks Home Entertainment. This company focused on making the studio's animated films available on DVD and in other home video options for distribution, and heavily relied on Universal's home entertainment subdivision. After the Viacom acquisition, it was merged with Paramount's home entertainment division, which sealed its fate. This is bad for any studio, as their previous works provide a steady source of income, especially when they've had massive movies in the past. Another division was made called Go Fish Pictures, and it was the kind of artsy cousin of DreamWorks Animation. They distributed the cult classic Millennium Actress along with other works like Ghost in the Shell 2. It co-produced 3 movies, one of which was The Chum Scrubber, which cost $10 million to make and only grossed $350,000. This critical and commercial failure led to Go Fish Pictures being shut down. Still, DreamWorks ended up independent again, and Reliance provided them with huge capital to work with. Geffen saw this as the time for him to let go and fully divested from DreamWorks. Now, I've been saving DreamWorks Animation until the end, as this is what they're best known for. Looking back, their first animated feature, Ants, probably wasn't the strongest way to start, but it did turn a tidy profit, $171 million on a $60 million budget. With the help of time, we can also look back at The Prince of Egypt, which was DreamWorks' statement piece at the time. The movie told a beautiful tale with captivating visuals and a striking color palette. It was everything that the Disney Renaissance wanted to be. The story of Moses' exile is almost a metaphor for Katzenberg's tale too, as he was thrown away by the ones he was closest to and worked hard to build himself back up. However, Katzenberg continued on with his goal of proving he could build a company as big as Disney himself. The first few years were still tumultuous, as even though they were going band for band with Disney, as I previously mentioned, movies like The Road to El Dorado and Sinbad were simply losing them money. Even with such heavy losses, the company was able to stay afloat thanks to Shrek, released in 2001. While the movie was riddled with issues and considered a hellhole for anyone working on it, the big green ogre managed to win awards and earned $492 million. DreamWorks was able to capitalize on its success and put together other original movies like Kung Fu Panda, How to Train Your Dragon, Megamind, Madagascar, and Trolls. This helped the studio gain financial stability while also developing validity. The founders knew this well and made DreamWorks Animation into a separate studio, preventing Viacom and Paramount from getting their hands on it during the purchase. The studio also gave them Shrek 2, which made nearly $1 billion and is one of the most successful animated movies of all time. However, there were more failures in store, and Katzenberg's overly ambitious predictions of the DVD sales of Shrek 2 to shareholders led to a stock price drop and an investigation on the company. Meanwhile, the company's upcoming decade was inconsistent. Their deal with Netflix saw many franchises getting their own shows, which I personally am a fan of. However, movies like Rise of the Guardians, Turbo, and Mr. Peabody and Sherman were bad for the company. Honestly, I expected Turbo to be bigger, as it is pretty enjoyable with a funny, derpy concept. Mr. Peabody and Sherman was the final nail in the coffin for Pacific Data Images. PDI initially laid off 250 people in 2013 after the Rise of the Guardians, and after the Hunger Games' shocking loss, combined with the failure of Mr. Peabody and Sherman, PDI was left in shambles. This led to 500 more layoffs before PDI was finally shut down. What made things worse was the fact that Disney was popping off at the time, forcing DreamWorks down. During this decade of difficulties, DreamWorks even negotiated and worked with Disney in a distribution deal. However, Disney dropped their deal with DreamWorks after a while due to unsatisfactory results, a slap in the face. Bringing back the wrestling analogy, while WWF ended up buying WCW, in the case of animated pictures, Disney discarded DreamWorks. While I think that this is for the best in the animation world, as more competition always results in more quality, it must have hurt Katzenberg a lot. This is especially true because out of all the founders, Katzenberg was the most successful and for the longest time. Geffen's record labels and deals managed to make a splash, but didn't leave the mark they wanted it to. Spielberg, obviously, is a huge influence in Hollywood and set standards over and over again, but his movies were often inconsistent, unfortunately. Meanwhile, Katzenberg Studios were the backbone of the DreamWorks group for decades, and now, after everything, it stands tall. Hell, the fact that Disney even agreed to a distribution deal with DreamWorks proves that they saw worth in Katzenberg's abilities. In 2015, Spielberg, Reliance Group, Entertainment One, and Participant Media came together to launch Amblin Entertainment, with DreamWorks Animation under them. And in 2016, DreamWorks Animation was finally sold to Universal Pictures for $3.8 billion. With this, Katzenberg eventually departed from his life goal, DreamWorks Animation. Even right now, the studio is delivering some amazing movies, but also producing some underwhelming ones. Thus is life in the creative field. While plenty of people are talking about how DreamWorks has fallen off or that it'll die eventually, I don't see it going anywhere. Throughout its journey, DreamWorks has always delivered in a haphazard way, and now, since their line of business has been streamlined, I think it's only a matter of time before they deliver more quality material. More Puss in Boots The Last Wish style stuff, please. Throughout their journey, they've had the support of Reliance since the day the two companies joined, and Reliance is looking to bounce back. Maybe Universal and Reliance can work together with DreamWorks to make something amazing. With that said, I personally believe that Katzenberg has managed to achieve his goal, at least to some extent. DreamWorks Animation is one of the only companies to have survived so long in an industry where Disney has such a strong chokehold, and they've delivered both critical and commercial successes which have defined the medium. But what do you think? It's a crazy world making movies, and not everyone can deliver. Over the years, DreamWorks has created some eye-popping, memorable movies, and also cornered the market on this face. The Wild Robot is a critical darling as we speak, so we'll wait and see how it all pans out. Let us know which DreamWorks movie is your favorite, and if you remember any of these subsidiaries that are no longer with us. Thanks for watching, and remember, Frederator loves you.